Bob Mills remembers when the stock show was held entirely out at the fairgrounds.
We used to show in the Soule building. I was like 10 years old.
In those days, champion bowls like this sold for $800. But after the new Rushmore Plaza Civic Center opened up, the stock show moved there. It was 1977 when the Civic Center had its grand opening, headlined by none other than Elvis. It was also the year Seattle Slew won the Triple Crown, when disco was all the rage, and you could buy your music on an 8-track tape.
A lot has changed. Disco is out, and most kids wouldn't know the difference between an 8-track and an indoor track. And the Civic Center has changed as well.
This building was designed back in the 70s. It was predominantly designed with one thing in mind, to get state high school basketball to Rapid City. We didn't design it for the Black Hills Stock Show and Rodeo.
But the stock show came, and so did the L&I. So did big-name entertainers and Broadway shows. And as our city grew, so did the Civic Center. In the 80s, the Rushmore Hall Convention Center was built. In the 90s, the food court was added. And in 2008, the ice arena opened. The Civic Center has been the heart of a revitalized downtown area. But what hasn't changed much is the Don Barnett Arena. The same hall where Elvis walked through in 1977 is still here, essentially unchanged.
Approaching 40-year-old facility that needs some major attention, and it's going to come at a cost.
The cost will be $180 million. It is the single biggest expenditure in Rapid City history. Voters will decide on March 10th whether to spend that in order to expand the Barnett Arena to nearly double in size. Regardless of the outcome, Bob hopes one thing does not change.
Through the expansion project, I hope they keep the concept of what I tell people when you come here is everybody's got a good attitude. We got to get along. You know, when we start expanding, that more or less means you're confining to a point because you only have so much ground to expand to, and everybody's got to get along. We gotta flow with each other.
Alicia Garcia, KOTA Territory News. Craig Balzer just wants an arena he can market.
My job is to run the best facilities I can, and having the most of a facility that I can is probably more important to me.
He's only been running the Civic Center for a few months, but he knows what his priorities are. Booking events that help pay the cost of running the Civic Center, helping the economic impact for the area, and having a place where the community can gather. But he wouldn't mind having the chance to market a larger facility.
In order to get a little bit larger show, first and foremost is we need to have the space and be able to present that show.
If voters approve it, what he may get is an arena that can host football games. The $180 million design is called the Blue Concept, an arena that can transform into a stadium. It would expand the current number of seats from 8,400 to 19,000, and the seating would be versatile and allow for multiple configurations.
Kind of the beauty of it is we build a new arena and then right next to the existing arena, and when they're plugged together, they have a footprint that's able to accommodate a football field.
That creates more floor space, which ultimately gives the arena more event days because it allows for multiple events to use the space on the same day.
We need to recognize that this is more than a concert venue or a basketball venue. There's a variety of opportunities that are in here existing that need more room. There are many, many other ones out there that would like to come this direction, but we don't have sufficient event days available for them.
Building this facility for 2013 or 2014 doesn't make much sense. We should really be building this for 2027.
But for some, the plan isn't a dream, but rather a fairy tale. Former Mayor Alan Hanks isn't alone in those concerns. He stands with 4 other former mayors who say that the Blue Concept is overplanned and underthought. The 5 mayors have banded together to form a committee called Fix the Plan.
We've got this entire Civic Center here, and we're talking about $180 million to fix the Barnett Center and add an adjacent arena with a movable wall so it could be 1 or 2 facilities. It strikes me, when I first heard it, I was floored.
Current Rapid City Mayor Sam Quaker looks at what a new expanded arena could mean for the community.
And what we want is we want a community that people will stay, where the kids will come back, their parents will come back after retiring from the Air Force, and we have multi-generational families living in our community and coming to the Civic Center.
If the city rejects the blue concept, Balter will roll up his sleeves and work with the next proposal.
I look forward to working with them. If this becomes a no vote, I certainly would like to hear what they have to say.
Alicia Garcia, KOTA Territory News. Lovely to look at, beautiful to hold, but you need to know the cost before the expansion can be sold. The price tag is $180 million. Richard Wallstrom, the former finance officer for Rapid City, says that it's common for cities to borrow money in order to get things built.
Of course, the city doesn't have $180 million in the bank for that, so instead it will borrow that money in the form of municipal bonds and certificates of participation and then pay that back over 20 or 30 years.
Rapid City would pay that debt back by using vision funds. Here's how it works. Rapid City charges 3 cents of sales tax. 1 penny of the sales tax goes to reduce our property taxes by supporting the general budget. Another penny is called the bed, board, and booze tax. Only businesses like hotels and restaurants pay this tax. Of the BBB tax, about $3 million a year goes to the Civic Center for operating costs. And the final 1 penny sales tax is split. Half goes to the CIP, or Capital Improvement Plan. The CIP is used for infrastructure projects. And the other half penny goes to the Vision Fund.
If you and I were to go to the bank, they would look at our income to debt ratio. Well, that's not something that we look at when it comes to a municipality.
Pauline Sumption is currently the finance officer for Rapid City. She's working on ways for the city to borrow the $180 million for the expansion. But former Mayor Alan Hanks has concerns about the risk the city is taking in borrowing that much money.
They are mortgaging our CIP fund. They have combined the Vision 2012 fund, they have combined the CIP fund. And in order to make this financing work, if there's a default, in other words, if the 2012 money does not come in as projected, we are pledging our CIP money.
In fact, the city did combine the 2 accounts into 1 fund.
Although for financial statement purposes, it will be combined into 1 fund to show that we do have sufficient revenue for, they call it a bond coverage ratio, where we would have to have a certain percent of revenue to over and above what our debt limit would, or our annual debt payment would be, and then because that brings our interest rate down. The more coverage that we have, the lower the interest rate we can get on our debt obligations.
The plan is to pay off the debt from the Vision Fund. Currently, the half-cent Vision tax generates about $11 million a year. The debt payment would be roughly the same amount, $11 million for 30 years. Economist Don Frankenfeld isn't worried about the risk in using the Vision money to fund the expansion.
The history of the Vision Fund is one of decent growth, not dramatic growth, and it's not likely to grow as dramatically in the future as it has in the past because we don't have inflation like we had in the past. But there's a strong likelihood that we won't have to dip into any other fund.
We all want the best for this facility. Everybody knows how terribly important it is to us. And the question is, how do we make it, affordable? Is it reasonable? Is it responsible? Is it realistic? And that's what we have to strive for.
Alicia Garcia, KOTA Territory News. Michael Brunick knows the difficulties of getting around the Barnett Arena firsthand.
The ADA seating is kind of in a place where your view isn't very good, and the egress in case of a problem is scary.
Michael isn't focused on why this is being addressed now. He's just glad it is.
And for me, it's a kind of a moral issue. I know everybody always wants to say, we really want to fix ADA. But when it comes right down to spending the penny for it, they very rarely want to vote for it.
The Justice Department identified many ADA deficiencies in the Barnett Arena. The city accepted that all those items needed correction and has now entered into an agreement with the DOJ to fix them. The items to be corrected are listed in this attachment to the settlement agreement.
You know, the sense was we didn't want to have litigation. We didn't want to argue about it. All of the stuff in the balance of the facility is stuff that we felt we could take care of, was legitimate and reasonably take care of in the next 24 months.
In addition to providing seats at all levels for people with disabilities, the DOJ concerns mostly have to do with slopes greater than 5%, counter heights, and bathrooms. Proponents of the expansion say it will cost the city $38 million to address all the ADA concerns, but that number includes not just the items in the DOJ agreement, but additional problems that were identified in a separate study commissioned by the Civic Center.
The board of the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center, at the request of the Civic Center's Future Committee, commissioned an analysis of our facility.
The commissioned study lists a total of 402 non-compliant items in the Barnett Arena. The DOJ agreement lists only 90. Former Mayor Alan Hanks, who opposes the current expansion plan, says that the Barnett Arena does not need to be in full compliance with the ADA. He says that the city is only required to provide reasonable access to people with disabilities.
Structurally, there's things that you just can't do literally without tearing the building down. So that's why the ADA regulations give latitude for existing buildings. As far as the Barnett Arena, what the Department of Justice is asking us to do is basically make it ADA accessible.
Regardless, Hanks doesn't want the cost of the ADA issues to be the rationale to spend $180 million. Michael Brunick says that he's just tired of being pushed to the back of the line.
And I likened it to, well, we can put landscaping and trash cans and bicycle stands up and down 8th Street because that's something that's pretty, but we're not going to deal with an ADA issue. And it's been not dealt with for a long, long time.
Alicia Garcia, KOTA Territory News. Richard Wallstrom is the former finance director for Rapid City. He does not agree with Mayor Sam Quaker that the current plan to expand the Civic Center is the right one. But here's what they do agree on. The Barnett Arena needs to be renovated to meet ADA requirements.
We have to be compliant with ADA. I mean, A, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to do so. And secondly, we have the Department of Justice telling us that we will or else.
It is every bit as important to people with disabilities as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was to people of race. And we have an absolute responsibility to address that issue.
When the American with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was enacted in 1990, it was clear that the Barnett Arena would need some work to address the new law. But nearly 25 years have gone by since then, and 5 mayors have come and gone without fixing the problems.
I understand now, with all the discussion that we're having in the community, why it's much easier from a leadership standpoint to defer maintenance and to not deal with it, because it can create such a debate when an issue this big is finally addressed.
Mayor Quaker decided that instead of ignoring the ADA issues, he would try to fix the problems. Here are the major problems with the arena. There aren't enough bathrooms, and the handicap stalls aren't large enough. The stairs need to be updated. The steps are too deep, and railings need to be put up. Counter heights also need to be adjusted. Event seating needs to be accessible throughout the facility. Right now, people with disabilities all sit in one area, and there's more.
If you stand in the middle of the Barnett Arena and you look up, the rise over run on most of the stairs is wrong. The road construction orange railings all the way around are too wide for a prosthetic device to fit over.
According to Jeff Bailey, the head of the expansion task force, the cost to get the Barnett Arena in line with the ADA is about $35 to $38 million. It cost $1.68 million to get the theater in the Civic Center ADA accessible. And in addition to the ADA concerns, there are other building code upgrades needed to modernize the arena.
Life safety issues and also code violations, according to the international building codes that, again, in the last 40 years have changed drastically. That as long as we're going in and cracked open that egg, we better go ahead and address those as well.
He says the cost for those other building code fixes is is another $32 million.
If we did nothing else except address the ADA issues, which are terribly important, and the life safety issues, which are also terribly important, the cost could be as high as $70 million. The question I think we have is, is that realistic? It doesn't sound like it to those of us on the outside. Even after having read the study, it does not sound realistic that $70 million would be required simply to bring the arena up to code.
We have a facility that is woefully non-compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that's what started this conversation. And we're faced with a stark choice. We can either spend a lot of money to remodel, to close the arena and remodel it, and then ultimately end up with a 1977 arena that's compliant with the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act law, or we can think bigger.
Alicia Garcia, KOTA Territory News. Two new sports teams. It's got everyone talking about football.
And then you can do events that you couldn't even think of doing under a roof in West River, South Dakota until this facility, things like football.
The revenue projections for the Civic Center expansion assumes that the city will host 2 new minor league franchises. That's in addition to the Rush.
When one goes back and reads the AECOM feasibility study, it includes, in terms of its pro forma numbers and its operating revenue, it includes revenue from 2 additional pro teams.
But when asked about it, the Rapid City Task Force says there are no plans to get additional teams.
But the larger football field is not intended to bring in any new teams.
Are we intending on bringing in any new sports teams?
I can tell you that the trends currently in the market is that football, indoor football, and basketball are both on the decline at the size that this community could support. That's not in our immediate plan.
So how does that affect the revenue projections? I spoke with the authors of the feasibility study who told me that if the city is not planning on obtaining 2 new teams, they'll have to make up for the shortfall in revenue some other way. Opponents to the plan want more details on how that would be done.
That although that they are included within those reports, within those studies, at this time the city has no desire to, or no intent of going out and trying to bring in 2 new teams. And that's fine, but if you're going to do that, you need to go back and adjust those numbers. You need to go back and adjust those projections.
Alicia Garcia, KOTA Territory News.
The other concern would be the volume, the sheer volume of accommodating the traffic in that area once the expansion would be in full force.
Tough.
When you have a multi-use facility and you haven't got enough parking for more than one event, or maybe just 2 events, nothing else, you really don't have a multi-use facility. You have a limited facility with limited parking and a great big facility you can't use.
If you build it, they may come, but where will they park? Right now, the Civic Center has room for 4,250 vehicles. That includes parking spaces on site, at the Journey Museum and Central High School. If you're willing to park downtown and walk to the Civic Center, that adds another 1,250 possible parking spots for a total of 5,500 spaces. But if the current expansion plan is approved by voters, the new arena would double in size. That means thousands more people could be coming to events.
The idea is to definitely grow the parking and grow the ability for people to get here safely and more conveniently. And so directly on site, the way to do that is to do that with a parking structure with stacked floors of parking.
The proposed Civic Center expansion plan includes a new indoor parking structure which would add 1,000 new parking spaces. But expanding the size of the arena requires taking away some existing parking spaces. The net gain in the number of parking spots would be in the hundreds, not thousands.
There are questions, serious questions about the parking. We're going to add the ability to have 5,000 to 10,000 perhaps new attendees if this plan comes through, and there's a net addition of only 300 additional parking spaces.
And so between the re-engineering of our flat surface parking as well as the addition of the covered parking, we expect to gain about 500 stalls overall.
The question remains, if people can't find convenient parking, will they stay? Opponents to the plan have their doubts.
They came in, they drove around for 45 minutes, could not find a parking place, left and went back home without attending a horse show. That's the kind of thing that will continue to happen and should have been part and parcel of this proposal.
And other events have seen their performances delayed.
Right now we are at a top end. Often our performances are at the same time that, say, the Shrine Circus is in the arena portion of it. So our patrons are having to wait to find parking, and they're competing for that space at the same time.
Alicia Garcia, KOTA Territory News.